Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jennie and Laurie's conversation about the upcoming Sagittarius season. So together, Jennie and I are astropath. Separately, we are Jennie Day of Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at lauriefarrington.com. And we both do all kinds of things. You can find us on different social media. You can schedule meetings for consultations, recordings, teaching. Yeah, check out what we're doing. Check out our websites and check out what we're doing. And in the meantime, if you'd like this video, subscribe to us. That would be really helpful. And leave us comments. Let us know what you're thinking and what you'd like to see us do in the future. So on to our topic, but before we get even there, one more thing. Jennie, what do you have going on that you want people to know about?
I'm just rolling out some workshops in early January. They are going to be in person, so you have to obviously be somewhere in the area of Vermont where I live, but just want to let you know to watch out for that. And that's it. And except I do want to say thank you to the people who have commented because we have gotten some more comments, and it's really fun to see those and respond and hear your stories and hear what's going on. So thanks for that.
Yeah, it is really wonderful to get these comments, and we don't always respond as quickly as maybe we should, but we will eventually respond. I don't have anything particular going on right now other than just consultations, and I'm working on my second book. My first one should be out in about a year, but these things take time. So on to our conversation about Sagittarius season. When does it start?
Yes. Okay, well, excited about your book, by the way, but it starts on November 22nd. So Sagittarius is always happening somewhere near American Thanksgiving, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, it's happening at 9:02 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 22nd. And, Sagittarius always comes at this time of year. And what is this time of year? It's the time when we're closing down the fall. It became fall sometime in September, like September 23rd. And then now we're really leaning into winter in the Northern Hemisphere or summer in the Southern Hemisphere. Because astrology was developed in the Northern Hemisphere, Sagittarius kind of carries that, like, all right, we're heading into winter. And I like to think of Sagittarius as kind of like the lantern, it's carrying the lantern in down, to the darker days of winter. Because when you hit that winter solstice point, it's like, oh my God, it's the darkest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere. But it also means that the sun is starting its move northward. So it's kind of that double-edged sword in a way, which I think really summarizes Sagittarius well, where it's trying to bring some light into the darkness. But it's also really optimistic. It's got this optimism, this warmth to it. And it also can be rather opinionated. One other thing I'll add to that is just that before we get more into the psychological impacts of Sagittarius, but it's just the idea that Sagittarius comes after Scorpio. So Scorpio is just that, deep dark. We have Samhain and Halloween in the middle of Scorpio season. So it's been time to be in the underworld, with the ghosts and the deeper, darker, heavier emotions. And Sagittarius comes along and is like, hey man, let's just tell a joke. I can't deal with all this heaviness, even though Sagittarius is also very concerned with wisdom, so it shows up to tell a joke, tell a story, have a laugh, tell the tale of the crazy, deep, dark experience with the dragon or whatever. It's really just kind of coming up for some levity and some optimism in the deep, dark days. So
that's great. That's great. Yeah, it's interesting to think of the whole year and the sun going through each sign, and each season holds 3 signs: one cardinal, one fixed, and one mutable. So here we are at, like you said, Jennie, the last of the fall signs. This is the mutable fire sign, and the mutability is just, it's changeable. It's changing into getting ready to move into the next season, which will begin with the cardinal earth sign of Capricorn. But right now we're in that sliding toward the beginning of winter. Yeah, here in the northern hemisphere. So Sagittarius is it's kind of a tricky sign. You know, it's fire, but it's changeable. It's mutable. It's very different. In my mind, it's very different from the other fire signs. You know, you think of Aries as the first fire sign, the cardinal fire, that big spark, that big explosion of fire. And then Leo as the ongoing, you know, just hot heat, burning steady. And then Sagittarius, you're into that space of the embers that are dying down, that are still wicked hot, but they're dying down to shift into what's next. So yeah, Sagittarius, interesting sign. Interesting sign. What else do you have to say about Sagittarius?
Well, I like how you use the example of the fire, because you can think about Sagittarius in a couple different ways. One would be like that spark at the top of the spire that's kind of a wild card, and you see, if you see a big bonfire from a distance and you see those like embers at the top of the fire, you're like, ooh, where are those going to go? That's Sagittarius, because it's very movable.
Interesting.
Another way I like to think about it with the fire analogy is as the coals. So I just think about ancient times of like gathering up the coal and keeping it going and carrying that coal onto the next fire in the nomadic existence. And so it really kind of, yes, bringing that fire. And that's part of why it carries all the significations in psychology of, being the carrier of the wisdom, like carrying the coals forward to spread the fire, to spread the light, to spread the wisdom to the next place. So it has this movability about it that is not the same as the other two fire signs. It's a little bit different. And also it's the arrow, right? It's the arrow that's loose from the bow. So that gives you that really clear image of it's carrying a lot of distance. Covering a lot of distance, and it's got a higher up view, and so that brings all these significations of idealism and optimism and expansive wisdom and all of those things that start when you start understanding what does Sagittarius mean in a person in a psychology sense.
Yeah, it's really about experience. And I love that you brought up the arrow. We think of Sagittarius, we think of that centaur, the half human, half horse creature with the bow and arrow. And, it's really not the centaur that's Sagittarius. It's the arrow at its highest point and that perspective. Because that's always what Sagittarius is searching for, I think, is perspective. The need of Sagittarius is to experience so that they have a very, very broad, expansive perspective. And I always bring this up. Those of you who've been listening to me for a while are probably a little sick of hearing this, but I can't help it. When I talk about Sagittarius, I always remember this little cartoon that I saw when I was probably, 8 years old. And it was the centaur coming to a crosswalk. And there was a directional sign at the crosswalk pointing in two directions. In one direction, it said enlightenment, and the other direction said Gary's party. And if you know people with strong Sagittarius, that really resonates, because there is that search for wisdom and yet also search for play and fun and levity. And which are you going to go for? Are you going to go sit on a mountaintop and meditate, or are you going to go to the party and have a good time? And finding your way in that can be a very Sagittarius dilemma. Do I want to party, or do I want to pray?
I knew you were going to tell the story, and it's great because you're right. It does really summarize what Sagittarius might mean in a person, and Sagittarius is a little bit hard to grasp. And I think the reason why is because it's the mutable sign of fire, as you already mentioned. And so it just makes it more unpredictable. It makes it more changeable. It makes it right when you think you've got it all figured out, it changes direction, so I think it has some of that. But I also think that as a mutable sign, like it actually really wants to be helpful. It really does an altruism to Sagittarius, which maybe sometimes gets, overlooked or something, but they're doing it for the purpose of, keeping things light, but to gain wisdom, to understand the meaning of things, to bring meaning to life, which is one of the basic needs as humans. Like we need meaning. And Sagittarius really does bring that meaning. I kind of think of it as a trickster figure. It kind of has that sprite, like that, coyote type of trickster energy where it doesn't want to be put in a box. It's going to move around, So I really wanted to just highlight that part of it, that changeability.
The other thing that I think is really pertinent to really understanding Sagittarius is the rulership. When you think about Jupiter as the ruler, not just of Sagittarius, but also of Pisces, that kind of opens up the, I don't know, it opens up some deeper understanding of Sagittarius to me. It brings in the, Pisces is about the spiritual, and yet Jupiter rules both Pisces and Sagittarius is always looking for meaning. It's not necessarily looking for that. It's a different level.
Yeah.
It may be a spiritual meaning that it's looking for, but it's on a very different level. And yet you can feel that similarity.
Yeah, it's like irreverent, right? There's a little more irreverent than
Right.
Pisces gets some more.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because it wants to also go to Gary's party, right? So
yes.
it brings in that irreverence.
Yeah.
And there's such a humor is such a thing with Sagittarius quite often as well, which is yeah.
I mean, I think all of this can be summarized by thinking about the archetypes. My three favorite archetypes are the daredevil. So like taking those risks and having a good time why not? Because it might be learning there. It might be meaning there, The jester is my other favorite one, like just being the court jester, the one that's keeping everything going, but also imparting these lessons that need to be taught, And then the other one is probably more like the adventurer. I think about those adventure people going off and embarking and finding whole new territories, that fire spirit that you need to be willing to, go across an unknown territory or go across an ocean or a foreign land. All of those things are to do with Sagittarius.
And let me bring in another one is the preacher.
Ooh.
And that brings in probably the most difficult side of Sagittarius is the fact that Sagittarius can get very opinionated about beliefs. I think that's the hardest part of Sagittarius. And so anyone with a really strong Sagittarius, lighten up a little.
Yeah. Well, this is a good point, though, because I know one of the things we like to talk about is all of these things that are spectrum, and none of this is intended to put you in any sort of box if you have a lot of Sagittarius, but more to see the wide spectrum that you can dance along, which is appropriate for Sagittarius, in these different expressions. And absolutely probably the darkest, worst side of Sagittarius is that like dogmatic preacher who is just going to shove down your throat their belief system, and they will not leave you any room for oxygen for your belief system, so that's absolutely the darkest, most out of balance side of it. So you can see that in those real, hair raising or hell raising, evangelical type of almost cult figures and things like that. You certainly will see that. Because they're very charismatic too. So there's this desire to follow that leader, but also the mutability brings in an instability to that darker side, So, and I guess the other thing is just excess, right? But
yeah, I was just going to say that I think, I lost what I was going to say, but there's something in that instability or insecurity that creates that need to hold on to those opinions so tightly. It's like because there is an insecurity in them that there's a holding on tighter. But that whole spectrum is really important to understand the entire spectrum of it.
Yeah. And I suppose I'll just add one other thing. And on the mundane level, it is as I started to say, was like, it can be excessive, you know, over optimism, over enthusiasm, over, you know, excess indulgence, like eating too much or consuming too much, or, you know, really struggling with the reality check, which is actually a great way to probably segue us into the season, because there is a reality check in the Sagittarius season. So is there anything else you wanted to add about the meaning? Because we could...
I don't think so. I think we covered everything we need to about Sagittarius. Yeah, excellent. I think we covered it all. So let's open up the chart of the ingress. So this, what we're looking at here, is the chart of the moment that the sun enters Sagittarius. And, you know, I just want to point out that it's very clear and obvious. The moment the sun moves into Sagittarius, it has just gone past Mars. So it comes into the season with a lot of energy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it yeah, it's fired up. There's just that conjunction. I think it was on the 18th, just a few days before, of the what is called the Sun Mars Cazimi, when they're exactly conjunct. And what that does is it kicks off a new 2-year cycle. I will say one geeky thing about it, which is that cycle doesn't happen very often in Scorpio. Like, it's not, I think it's, I want to say it's every 30 odd years that they meet in Scorpio. So it's a different one, because Scorpio is extra powerful with Mars, you know, so you have this powerful Mars that kicked off a new cycle. So nerd alert.
Nerd alert. Okay.
All right. What else do we want to talk about? Lots of stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's think about, we can go week to week, or you want to give some ideas of some of the themes that you're seeing here, Jenny?
Yeah, so some highlights. Saturn's pretty involved. We'll go into this more detail, but you can see actually even in this chart, Saturn's exactly squaring the sun. So Saturn's kind of like the gatekeeper. Anybody who wants to go into Sagittarius is going to have to deal with Saturn. Saturn's the reality check I just mentioned, where it's almost like this stop dead in your tracks. It's almost like coming to a border, you know, and you've got to go through there's a guard there, and you're going to have to give them your passport and explain what you're doing. There's a little bit of that kind of energy. So Saturn's involved. After you get through that gate, there's a lot of softer aspects to Saturn from Venus and Mercury, which is wonderful and helpful. Speaking of Mercury, Mercury's going to be stationing retrograde towards the end of this season. It's on December 13th. So there's that retrograde cycle. So wherever Mercury is at the beginning of this, it's going to be almost retracing a steps, not quite, but close. Basically, it's going to go back into Sagittarius later. So just keep that in mind, beginning of a Mercury retrograde cycle at the end of the season there. Other themes, Venus is in Libra. So Venus is having to go back and she's doing all the stuff that the sun and the Mars and Mercury all did a while ago. So she's kind of in Libra. We'll talk more about that, because one of the weeks is specifically highlighting that. Other than that, there's a few squares, there's some challenges here, but it's all really for your growth. And there's also just some, you know, really nice ways that things flow and move forward. So it's a kind of a mishmash of things.
It is kind of a mishmash of a month. It's kind of interesting. I just want to say something that I always think of, that I always find a little bit interesting in our culture here. Most people celebrate these holidays in the middle, well, that we're heading toward. And I always think it's interesting that Mercury almost always is retrograde right during the period of time that most Americans or many Americans are out shopping. And I always find that to be one of the most interesting things. It goes retrograde on the 13th. It's about midway through December. People are like, oh, I've got to go shopping. And, you know, Mercury is retrograde. So if you are a person who shops for these holidays, if you can do that very, very early in the season before the 13th, you'll be in much better shape as the rest of the process of holidays moves along.
Yeah, the only other thing I think is worth mentioning, Laurie, just because you mentioned the Jupiter rulership. Jupiter's in Taurus here. It's still in Taurus. So even though Sagittarius season and there's opportunities to kind of go off the rails a little bit with enthusiasm, But Jupiter's in Taurus. It's pretty conservatively placed here. It wants stability. It wants things to feel grounded, and so I kind of think that that's actually very helpful for this
Yes.
particular Sagittarius season to have Jupiter in Taurus like that. I think that could go hand in hand with some things.
Yeah. For those of you who are listening to this or just kind of learning this stuff, just always realize that when we're talking about a particular season, like this one being Sagittarius, always look, where is the ruling planet of that sign? And that is going to give a big flavor to what's going on throughout the month. Yeah, I like that. I like the fact that Jupiter is in Taurus here. That's a very, very nice thing.
Yeah, so hopefully it gives you some sense of what the few weeks are ahead. And let's talk a little more week by week, don't you think?
Sure. Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, the thing that really comes right out of the gate is that square with Saturn, between the sun and Saturn. That happens on November 23rd, the very next day after the sun goes into Sagittarius. It does that square to Saturn. So there's some way in which the season gets underway under a reality check, under a bit of a restrictive energy. We want to, get into this Sagittarius expansion, but like you said, there's a gate that we have to go through first.
Yeah.
That's a really important thing to pay attention to. What's the restriction at that very beginning of the season? And when we get into the individual pieces, we'll talk about how that plays out for each of us.
Nice. And then that's shortly followed by Mars. Mars goes into Sagittarius the very next day on the 24th. And then the very next day, it squares Saturn. So that's that kind of exactly what you just said, Laurie. This is the beginning where you start out with, whoa, some kind of restriction. I'm feeling in a box. I'm feeling a clamp down. But the good news is that after that, the aspects get a lot softer. But we still have that full moon that first week. So on the 27th, we have a full moon in Gemini. It's at 4 degrees of Gemini. And normally, a Gemini full moon is like, oh my God, clarity, here we go. Like some minutia or some detail or some communication becomes really clear. However, Mercury squares Neptune the same day. Mercury is the ruler of the Gemini moon, and it is not clear. It's actually foggy. It doesn't know what is happening. It's got some stress put on it by that Neptune, like right there in that first week. So we will make a video about that full moon when we get more into that.
And I think the nice thing about that is right after, well, that ends that first week, that Mercury squaring Neptune, that's the end of that first week. And then we go into December 1st, where Mercury immediately moves into Capricorn. So there's a seriousness that comes after that square. The Mercury goes into Capricorn, and our minds and our thinking are going to really kind of buckle down. Whatever that gate is that we went through around facing some reality with Mars and the sun squaring Saturn, now our thought processes kind of catch up to it. It's like, oh, okay, I've got to really buckle into a serious state of mind.
Well, I like how you put that. Yeah. But what the good news is that Mercury sextile Saturn.
Yeah.
So it goes into Capricorn, and then it's in a sextile with Saturn and Pisces. So that's a really wonderful opportunity. I mean, this is stability. With that sextile, this is helpful with your mindset. Instead of being all, it's, oh, okay. You get clear, you get like or maybe not clear, but you get grounded. You sort of see the material effects of what your mindset can be capable of.
Yeah, you're kind of able to really, whatever, face the reality of the situation and stabilize yourself into it. I really like that. I think that's a very helpful, that Mercury going into Capricorn there and then sextiling Saturn. That's really lovely. And right after that, on December 3rd, we've got a little bit of a glitch there with Venus squaring Pluto.
Details.
Details.
I mean, I think to me, the signature of this second week really is about that Venus. I mean, you have that nice Mercury thing we just mentioned, but there's a thing with going on with Venus here. And what Venus is doing is it actually conjuncts the South Node early in that week, and then it squares Pluto on the 3rd, as you mentioned, and then the very next day it goes into Scorpio.
Right.
So this might sound familiar if you've watched our other videos, because this is exactly what the Sun and Mars have done, you know, and Mercury at one point. And so now Venus is kind of like on cleanup duty, where she's sort of like, okay, I hit the South Node, there's some, you know, issue in relationship, there's some dependency or some problem with the support of this relationship or something. And then it's like the Pluto square to me symbolizes you're going to have to dig something up. Something is buried that's causing problems in whatever relationship is being highlighted by this for you. You know, there's something you're going to have to dig into, you know, and then Venus is like, okay, we've hit that problem. And then she goes into Scorpio. So now it's like, what are the emotional repercussions of these issues that you've had? You know, and this is, again, a reiteration of some of the things you may have seen in Libra season and a little bit in Scorpio season. So that's very interesting, you know. And then what's awesome, after you've done all that, she trines Saturn.
And there again, you know, both of the, it's interesting that both of these, just as they move into Mercury into Capricorn, Venus into Scorpio, and then right away, they each make this really positive aspect to Saturn. So Saturn, whatever Saturn's doing in that initial, kind of hard piece at the very beginning, is now really setting us up to stabilize our values, our thinking. There's a lot of gifts in those aspects. There's some really powerful gifts in those aspects, I think.
And some sort of, I also keep thinking about it as it's a payoff. You've done the hard work. You had to have the hard conversations. You had to deal with the problems, the dependencies, the issues in the relationship. And then you get this like, okay, now you know where you're at in this relationship. Now you've cleared the decks and you have this, and I really like that. To me, that's sort of a highlight of the season. Are we ready to move on to that next week?
Sure. That next week, we start out with Neptune stationing direct. And, you know, this is important, most important if you have planets right around that 24, 25 degrees of any of the mutable signs. That's where it's going to really be significant for you personally. Anything else you want to say about that? Neptune stationing direct?
No, I mean, no, I think you may or may not feel that at all. Depends if it's on a sensitive point in the chart, but it's good to know about.
Yeah.
So good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we go into really that Mercury trining Jupiter. After it's done, you know, it's had these really positive aspect with Saturn. Now it's trining Jupiter. That's really very, very lovely. Whatever conversations you want to have around here, in that around the 8th through the 11th, you know, there's just really nice aspects to Mercury there. So your mind is functioning well, or we can hope that things are moving smoothly in the world.
Yeah. There's certainly some healing available that week, isn't there? I just think, that's a nice things, a couple other things in there, but just there's a possibility of some real healing that can come about in a relationship, you know, because the next day you have, so we're December 9th now, you have Venus opposed Jupiter. Those are the two most beneficial planets, generally speaking, in a chart. And you know, in opposition, there's just a viewpoint. I mean, it may bring up a little bit of those Taurus Scorpio themes we talked a lot about during Scorpio season, of, you know, where Scorpio is kind of the emotional resources, and then Taurus is more of the material, you know, actual concrete things. Might be some kind of play off between those two energies again, but really with Venus and Jupiter, it's not, it's going to be to some helpful insight, I think, rather than something.
You know, that week is really very interesting because all of the aspects are really positive. I mean, an opposition, people think of oppositions as being difficult, but this like you said, it's Venus and Jupiter. How much difficulty is there going to be? Really, it's more of an awareness, an ability to see where you're at with those things. And we're moving right into the new moon on December 12th. So this is the darker phase of the moon here during this week. So there's a lot of real, just there's a quietness in it. There's a inwardness in that week itself. There's a very positive, I like that week a lot.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of a contentment week, like just trying to be content with what is and just relaxing a little bit. It's that week, if you are a holiday person, like you are in that kind of zone where you do have some chill time. Just, I don't know. And that new moon in Sagittarius, like just, having a good time.
Yeah.
Like there's pretty soft, there isn't anything super challenging. I mean, there's a square to Neptune in that, but whatever. The main thing with that new moon is going to be the Sagittarius. Like the wisdom, the meaning, the humor. So
and we'll make a video about that when the time comes as well. Right.
Yeah. And then we move into the final week or the final, a little more than a week, but the final section, we'll say, of Sagittarius season. And what you have is Mercury turning retrograde on December 13th. It's happening at 8 degrees of Capricorn. And yeah, it's gonna go all the way back into, I think it's 22, maybe something like that, degrees of Sagittarius. So that's that 3-week Mercury retrograde period. Great time to button up that to-do list, get some nice things done. But it's a pretty, I don't know, it's not a bad Mercury retrograde. It's sextile Saturn, it trines Jupiter, it doesn't have hard aspects. So it's really a nice time to revisit the things that make you feel stable and go back and get some inspiration.
And I kind of like that this Mercury retrograde is coming right after the new moon, because we have had that week before, which looks like such a pleasant week, and in the dark phase of the moon. So we've got time to sit and contemplate what we need to go back and revisit, really taking advantage of what we know about how to work with Mercury retrograde is going to be really helpful this month, because we've got that time ahead of the new moon, and then the new moon itself, and then right into that Mercury retrograde. So make your lists of what needs to be done. Hopefully, Jenny and I have been talking about doing a video about Mercury retrogrades, as far as like for a full year, like for next year, to do one that really covers all the Mercury retrogrades and really digs into our understanding of how best to use those periods of time. They're really, I love Mercury retrograde. People get all nervous about it. I think in general, people are becoming more and more over time to understand that there are very workable ways to manage and navigate Mercury retrograde, but we'll do a video about that at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is just not trying to jam stuff through. You want to take that, like you said, Laurie, like take that week ahead, figure out what you need to do, and like just adopt that mindset of like, I'm not going to try to jam through that last minute thing I was trying to get done before the holidays. Like if you haven't done it by then, like just let it go if you can.
Right. Absolutely. And following that, a few days after that, we've got the Sun square Neptune. So this is a period, this last portion of this Sagittarius is really calling for quiet, for time alone in a lot of ways, other than we'll get to that Venus oppose here.
Yeah, I was like other than that, I don't know. It is. I mean, you have that. I mean, what do you think of Saturn square Neptune? Do you have a specific thing you think of, or
you mean the Sun square Neptune?
Yeah, sorry.
The Sun square Neptune.
Sun square Neptune.
Yeah, the Sun square Neptune on the 16th. I just think that it is, I don't know. I feel like, I mean, we could think about it as far as the whole cycle, but we're not going to do and this is a closing down cycle. So there is some element in this of release, but for the most part, I think the square between the Sun and Neptune is requiring us to really pay attention to something that we may be confused about. And
Mm,
I think there's a real element in it of asking us to trust our innate wisdom.
mm. Oh, I like that. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
good.
yeah. If you feel confused during that period of time, right around that sun square Neptune, don't be surprised, but don't try to figure it out. I think the thing that
Mm,
gets people tied up in knots when there's something challenging going on with Neptune is they try to figure it out. And you can't. It's Neptune. It's you try to grab hold of it and put something specific on it, it just slides through your fingers. You have to just sit
mm.
steady and allow your imagination and your intuition, and you have to allow yourself to trust something in that process.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah. Thanks for clearing that out. Because I think, it isn't interesting because you have that aspect. And the next day, oh no, 2 days later, you have the Mercury trine Jupiter. That's its second
Again,
trine to Jupiter in the retrograde cycle. So you have that, reiteration of the contact to Jupiter. That's really nice. And then you come to the first quarter moon phase, which is going to have Neptune in the mix. It's close enough of an orb that it is
and
just
it's in
kind of
Pisces.
reiterates that. What's that?
And it's in Pisces, so the
Yes. Yeah.
co-ruler is Neptune as well.
Yeah. So that, all the more to say, just relaxing, softening into the kind of softer side of things. This is a good time to think about maybe being a little more forgiving and understanding of people around you, or that might just happen to you and you're like, wow, I can't believe I was able to let that go. Because then
But
you're going to come to, yeah, go ahead. Then you're going to
yeah,
come to the last day and ta-da.
right. That last day can be a tough one. We've got Venus opposing Uranus. So, how do we want to think about this? There is something volatile. There's something, some awareness while we were in that Neptunian fog of trust.
Yeah, something's going to pierce through and be like, oh,
Something, yeah, something may
right?
pierce through. And,
Yeah.
I think with Uranus, with anything that brings in Uranus, there's the whole statement that we've probably all overheard of expect the unexpected, but there is some piercing of an idea or an ideal or some
Mhm.
way that you believe things to be that you suddenly, it's sort of that idea of you see something, you can't unsee it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good, like a shock. Like, oh my God, like, whoa. I
Yeah.
didn't want to, I don't know. I think about how often that happens if I'm watching something on Netflix, is it goes into your brain. Um, but so I'm glad you said that. It's a really good way to think about it. And also what I was thinking was it's also reminiscent of the Scorpio new moon, because now it's Venus's turn to oppose Uranus. At the Scorpio new moon, you had the sun, the moon, and Mars oppose Uranus. So think back to November 13th or thereabout. We're actually making this video before that, but just think to that time frame as you watch this. And just it might give you some clues as to what we're talking about. It could be something to do with a relationship, the same relationship, or a totally different one.
Okay, so you're
So
talking about the new moon in last month. I mean,
yeah, the Scorpio new moon. Yeah,
yeah, not
from November.
the Sagittarius new moon, but the previous new moon. Okay.
Yeah, the one way back on November 13th, like as you're watching this video of just like, oh, I mean, so it just might give you some clues to what is going on, or it might be a reiteration of something you dealt with back then.
Yeah,
Just trying to link it back.
well, it's so important if you really want to learn and understand this stuff. It's really a good idea to keep a journal so that you can go back to these dates and really like, oh yeah, I remember what happened then and how that relates to now. It's always good to do that.
Yeah, and also, Laurie and I are always thinking about your lives, and your life doesn't happen in little chunks. Like it all flows together. One situation happened a while ago bleeds into something you're dealing with now. I mean, it's all linked. And on that note, all of this, your natal chart is going to play a huge role in how this Sagittarius season affects you. Sagittarius season, I guess I'm tied there.
Yeah.
And the final thing I want to say before we move on is that, and then Mercury sextile Saturn at the very, very end, before the sun moves into Capricorn. So that's the second Mercury Saturn contact sextile, which brings in, you know, the gifts of the Mercury retrograde. So that's helpful. It's happening the same day as that. So that's some helpfulness coming your way.
And then we move right into Capricorn, and we're at the winter solstice, and that's a big one, but we'll make that video when the time comes. For now, I think we're ready to move on to the individual impacts.
I think you are correct. Yes.
Okay, let's open this up. There we go.
Oh, look at that. All right, folks. So for those of you with Aries rising, this Sagittarius season is putting the spotlight on your 9th house. The 9th house is your worldview, your ability to think critically, to develop a way of seeing the world. So it refers to things like higher education, travel to foreign lands. There's a whole bunch of other things. It can be your religious beliefs. There's quite a few things that can be tied up with your worldview. And with Sagittarius here, you probably tend to have a couple of things, probably a natural optimism, and possibly a big opinion about things. And so this Sagittarius season really allows you to kind of grapple with that, like what is coming to light during this season for you that are sort of Sagittarius things about meaning and learning and all those topics. Because Saturn is serving as a sort of, I don't know, I kind of thinking of it as a border guard or some kind of gatekeeper, you know, like somebody who won't let you get on the carousel ride until you prove you have a ticket, you know, something like that. So Saturn here is demanding that you kind of check yourself, check your worldviews, check what subconscious patterns are actually dominating your worldview in a way that you can't really see. So I think this one might have a lot to do with your biases that you're not even that aware of, and that this Sagittarius season is going to give you an opportunity to, first of all, have to work with them, have to look at it and be like, geez, what is that? What are my unconscious things that I hold against people or that I allow to let me be sort of overly opinionated and ironically narrow instead of being wise and big, you know, that you can be here. As the season progresses and you get more into those softer aspects with Saturn, you will see more of an opportunity, you know, to broaden your mind in a way that is realistic, in a way that encompasses the realistic point of view for other people on the planet besides yourself, you know, other beings, animals, you know, the environment, all of those bigger factors can come into play here. Yeah.
I like this. I like just thinking about, you know, for those of you with Aries rising, Saturn's there in your 12th house. It's been moving through there. You're doing some deep inner work. And at this time of Sagittarius season, that deep inner work has brought you to a point where you have to pay attention to something that, something about your worldview that is in contrast in some way to what you are learning. So you have to do some piece of work there in order to get the gifts that Saturn is ultimately bringing to you know, with the more positive aspects as the month goes on. But it really, this is a time to really be considering whether your worldview, your understanding of the greater world, whether it expands you or it just locks you into a position of big opinions. Because that's really, you know, there's a grappling with that. And a need to just allow yourself to see the world from that high level of the arrow at its highest point.
Yeah. I like how how you talked about that, because, you know, it's occurring to me too, as you're saying the other piece here is it may feed into your career. There may be an opportunity in the way that you change your mindset that it will affect your profession as well in a really positive way. So that's something you want to bear in mind too. Like, this isn't just for your own personal thing. This is also for how you behave, you know, in your public reputation and all that kind of stuff. It's really showing up at the top of your chart. So yeah, awesome.
Okay. Well, let's move on to those of you with Taurus rising. So if you've got Taurus rising, the Sagittarius season is really holding that spotlight on your 8th house. The 8th house is, you know, it's a tricky house to consider. The 8th house is where we really have to navigate other people's belief systems, other people's ideas. And yet with Sagittarius in that house, this is an area where you have your own opinions about how other people and what other people's opinions are. But it's kind of an interesting little twist there, isn't it?
Yeah.
But there's some way in which you are really being asked to expand your ability to navigate, expand your ability to set proper boundaries. And, you know, with the Saturn there in your 11th house, you want to really pay attention as the season begins to what is feeling restrictive coming from the area of your community, other people that support you. Where do you feel like you're being kind of held to a standard that you're not quite comfortable with? Maybe there's some sort of a restriction, something happening there that once you get clear, you know, I think maybe, you know, the 8th house is about boundaries, how you set boundaries. And with Sagittarius there, that's not necessarily easy. You want to just, you know, slough that off as not so important, maybe. But there's something coming from people who support you that's really pushing you and insisting that you get clear about what those boundaries are. Once you do that piece of work, then you can accept the greater gifts that Saturn is bringing as you are learning how to be in relationship with people who support you, with your community.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's in with the 8th and the 11th. This is so interesting because I think of those as 2 of 4 houses that kind of relate to your to resources. You know, so as you mentioned, Laurie, other people's resources, the 8th house, and then the 11th house is social resource, like how you get things done as a group or how you're part of a group. You know, so it's definitely something coming into play there. And it strikes me that, you know, once you get through that difficulty, once you deal with the fact that you're being challenged on some level, which it does seem likely it could be some sort of community member coming at you going, hey, you can't throw your opinion around like that or something like that. Once you kind of get over that initial resistance, then there's a huge opportunity for you to learn something totally new about yourself and the way you set boundaries and embrace a new community or a different community or a way in which you've never thought about accepting the supportive community. I mean, that's what Saturn represents with its hard aspects in the beginning and then the softer aspects as the season goes on. That what you thought at first was like in your face, kind of an annoying challenge that you don't want to deal with, actually turns into this gift and this opportunity for something that can affect you on a profound level for your growth, you know. And it's funny, I think with Sagittarius in the 8th house as a Taurus rising person, like it is kind of tricky because I could totally see how you could either be way too optimistic about other people and their bullshit, or you also could be so opinionated and just kind of be like, no, I'm not dealing, you know, kind of be, funnily enough, that kind of more cranky version of the Sagittarius energy here, you know. So really you're trying to find that sweet spot where you can use humor to deal with other people's stuff, you know, where you can see the wisdom of your own ability to set boundaries, like those sorts of themes. So it's kind of interesting placement.
Yeah. And as you are growing in your understanding of how to navigate other people's stuff, that is really supporting the hard work that you're doing around getting your needs met through a community. Really. Right.
Nice.
Okay. So let's move on to those of you with Gemini rising.
Cool. So those of you with Gemini rising, the Sagittarius season is spotlighting your 7th house. The 7th house, in a way, is a very simple house to understand. It's if the 1st house is self, then this is the house of other. We like to talk about this a lot, is that significant other, which can be your spouse. It could be a partnership, like a business partnership, a work colleague that you're have an equitable relationship with. And again, it can be any one-on-one relationship, you know, like you're going on a walk with a friend. That's going to be a seventh house walk, we'll say. So those are all of the topics that are being brought up. So think about for yourself, Gemini, who this might relate to in your life. And then immediately recognize, well, this relates to how you are in partnership. And really what that can bring up is you can be just a wonderful, supportive, optimistic partner who really uplifts your partner with your sense of humor, with your wisdom, you know, with like the idea that there's meaning in what they're doing. And I can certainly think of people like that in my life. And at the same time, on the more kind of side of things, which the Saturn square could bring up, there might be you know, a lot of opinions being thrown around, or very like, no, it's this way and this is my set of beliefs, you know. So I could see that as well playing into it. And as ever, the key thing to really remember is, how do you relate to the relationship, the partnership, the whatever, because this is your chart. So keep that in mind before you go throwing out accusations of your partner having too big of an opinion. And during the Sagittarius season, there's some stress coming at you. Looks like it's probably from your profession, your work life, or the way you show up in public. There's some sort of stress that's being put on you that you don't really feel like dealing with, and you're kind of like, ugh. But if you can go, okay, I just need to accept this challenge, this sense of restriction, because if I can get through the initial gate, I'm going to find myself in some new territory that's going to profoundly impact my relationships and my work life. Something like that.
Right. So, you know, I mean, this may very well, for those of you with Gemini rising, be suggesting a difficulty with a work relationship, you know, because that Saturn is squaring it from the 10th house. So yeah, over the course of a chunk of 3 years here, you've got Saturn moving through that 10th house. So there's an awful lot of effort and learning that you're going through in your career or your reputation, how you show up in the world. And right now during Sagittarius season, your intimate partnerships, your relationships with others are really shining a light on that. Or, you know, the work that you're doing in one is supporting the other. Let's think of it that way. You know, you said something about, you know, not throwing accusations around with your partner. And it just kind of made me laugh, because I'm thinking about, you know, with Sagittarius in that 7th house, that's what you attract. You know, you attract partners who have big opinions, or who have a lot of humor, or who have an expansive, wise perspective on the world. That's what you want to be in relationship with. So before you jump on accusing them of being opinionated, just know that that's kind of what you look for. Anyway, it's interesting to think about that little, you've got to go through that gateway. You've got to learn something from the community, something that's stressing you or creating some sort of restriction. Maybe something at your job is creating a restriction in your relationship, or a difficulty in your relationship. Moving through that will offer the gifts of Saturn on the other side of it.
And I was just thinking about, you know, the whole relationship thing. You said attracting opinionated people. It also might be just that you need to have adventures with the person you're with, you know, because I love that adventure explorer version of Sagittarius. Like, you know, you need to kind of be spicy and to change and to go do something fun and different and go to foreign countries and travel. And those could be also another way that this might play out for those of you with Gemini rising. So just a thought.
Yeah, with Gemini rising, you want adventures with your partner. If you aren't having adventures with your partner, you're going to get pretty bored and all of that. Okay, so let's move on to those of you with Cancer rising. So this puts the focus, the spotlight of Sagittarius season in your 6th house. The 6th house is very much, you know, it's our day-to-day routines. It's the things that we do on a regular routine level that support our health, that support our day-to-day lives, so it's healthcare routines, how we take care of ourselves. So, with Sagittarius there's an element of your healthcare that you probably really are quite idealistic about your health. You have big ideas and big opinions of the best ways to take care of your health. There's something here at the beginning of this season, something in your belief system with Saturn up there in the 9th house. There's something in your belief system that is confounding your process of routines, that's questioning it. It's like, okay, I've got my dietary stuff this way. This is my opinion about how my diet has to be. But then some information coming through some educational channel or something that is causing you to question it. So question it. I would say, first of all, don't sweep it under the rug. Do some research, do some study, make sure you're on the right path. Once you've allowed that voice of reason that you might not want to listen to, once you've allowed that voice of reason and done the work necessary, then you can move on and improve those routines.
Nice. Yeah, I like how, with the season, it's kind of like there's this challenge in the beginning that, so maybe it's one of those things where it might instantly get your back up, like, oh, I'm not doing that, or I don't want to do that, or that's so annoying, or go away, or it's too authoritarian, or whatever. But the idea that if you can just pause and sort of, accept that change, accept the necessity of growth, and welcome really within the 6th and the 9th house. I mean, what a welcome impetus to growth, really, because once you can get through that, as we were saying in the beginning of this whole video, then there's like this much more support around what that is. So if you do that research, you're probably going to discover how supportive whatever you find out about is going to be. And it might not be exactly what you think. I mean, Saturn is in Pisces after all. So you may discover something that kind of blows your mind, that you can incorporate into routines, and let's face it, with Sagittarius in the 6th house, like that's kind of delightful. Like you want change, you want learning and wisdom and meaning and adventure and all these things that can somehow be part of your growth. So it is an important time to just kind of welcome in whatever that is. The other thing I was going to say about the 6th house I've been revisiting lately is how the 6th house can refer to competence. The idea that you diligently work at something to develop a skill set, and here it could be that you don't, you're being asked to develop that skill set further by jumping through a more serious hoop, a hoop of responsibility, or a hoop of taking authority in some other way that you don't really want to. But if you can kind of get over yourself a little bit there and embrace that kind of more authoritarian learning, again, it can open up the keys to really developing a whole new skill set in a different way that you weren't even aware of. So just want to throw that in there.
And there's just something in this with Sagittarius in that 6th house, the ability to really develop wisdom in how you care for yourself. And nice. Yeah, I mean, that's what Saturn is kind of pushing you. You've got to take this. You can't just go into this, unthought through expansion. You have to think about it and let it do the work. There has to be work involved to get the real wisdom piece.
Yeah.
Of Sagittarius, right?
Yeah. My personal example here, because this is me, is that I'm interested in getting some sound healing with sound bowls, and I want to do a little research on what those are and how they impact you. And I want to know the science, because there is science behind that. It's new, it's newer, but I'm curious. So that's my personal version of it. Is
and that's so perfect. I mean, it's so perfect if you think about it. Sound bowls. Yeah. I mean, that is so Sagittarius and Saturn in Pisces in the 9th house. both ruled by Jupiter. Yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
You
You
know,
can't.
and a Cancer rising person, it's like the need for healing, the need to balance that watery, whatever other things. And again, please remember your natal chart, what other water things you might have in your chart, and what's the Saturn doing in Pisces to activate that. So anyway, just want to give a personal example.
Well, I love your personal example. It couldn't be better. You can't make this stuff up. I love that. Okay, we're going to move now on to those of you with Leo rising.
So with Leo rising, this whole Sagittarius season is delightfully putting the spotlight on your fifth house. I know Laurie and I are both big fans of the fifth house. The fifth house, I mean, you can think of it as the kind of next step in your self-expression. It's your creative self-expression. So it's, in a sense, you kind of create yourself in this house. And what you're really doing here is you're creating a thing that you love to do, that you would do. There's nothing to do with money or gain or outcome. It's just because you love doing it. So another great way we like to talk about this is, when you're having a laugh with a kid, like you're playing with a kid a game, or and it just is such a delightful child energy that can come about from this. And it doesn't matter if you have kids or not. That's not the question. It's any children, having that playful energy. So that's what Sagittarius is bringing. And to you, it's like, I feel like you, as a Leo rising person, there's a great deal of optimism available through those pursuits. Like, so if you're not feeling optimistic and you're kind of feeling down, you need to kind of dig into a creative process in a new way and really get in touch with that playful energy. But on the other hand, you have a kind of natural gift for that here. So those are some of the things to think about. And then during the Sagittarius season, right out of the gate, there's this sort of challenge that is put to you about this. It's some kind of, I don't know, downer energy, like it's a bummer, dude, coming from the eighth house, like Saturn is squaring the sun. And it's kind of putting this demand, like, well, that's nice, but what are the boundaries that you need to draw? Or maybe someone else's values or something like that is coming at you. A good way to think about this is like, if you are a parent, this might be somebody else judging the way that you're parenting your child. I mean, that would be, and even if you don't have a kid, just thinking about that sort of heavy energy coming at you when somebody's, putting their stuff onto you and you're kind of like, no, I don't want that. But what Saturn's trying to let you know is there's actually some learning here. There's something to be gained about your own creative process, by grappling with that struggle, by accepting this greater level of responsibility for your creativity. And then as you turn and face that, the rest of the season is sort of saying, and look at how many gifts are going to come from that if you can embrace that. There's so many things that can come out of it that'll be helpful.
I love that you brought up, your little idea of people judging your parenting. But that's so you can think of it in all the other ways, other people judging your artwork, your creative pursuits. There's something, right out of the gate here that there is a judgment. That's what this definitely feels like, a judgment on how you're trying to play, how you're trying to expand yourself. There's some, and it may, it's probably coming at you from outside, but really thinking about it as your own internal judgment on how what you're doing, what your creative work is, or your parenting, or who you're falling in love with. So, expect that, or, watch it as it occurs and kind of listen. If there's someone saying, oh, you're doing this creative process in a wrong way, rather than going into defense mode because the Sagittarius has got all their own opinion, rather than doing that, listen. Maybe that other parent has something worthwhile to tell you about how you're raising your kid. Maybe not, but listen. Maybe that other artist person has something to tell you that you may be triggered and not want to hear, but listen. because
Yeah.
once you get through that, once you learn how to manage, really with Saturn moving through that 8th house, you are learning in a very big way over a period of approximately 3 years. You are learning how to navigate other people's opinions. So this is just an opportunity to do that. And you don't want to do it by just closing the door and getting angry. You want to do it by listening, taking it in, and understanding what you can learn, even if all you're learning is I don't want to say it that way, but even if what it is you're learning is just to set better boundaries.
Yeah. I just want to add, or just to say, I'm so glad you brought up that little piece about the lovers, because I think sometimes I forget to kind of really get into that with the 5th house, and don't want to go off on a big thing about it. But I love the idea that it might be that you have a lover that somebody doesn't approve of, and you're just like, F off, and then later on, there might be some more understanding about what that person was trying to say, not in a negative way necessarily about the lover or anything, but just sort of like, that it was more constructive than you originally thought. But I love that you brought that up, because we forget to talk about that with the 5th house, and that might be applicable to some listeners. And I don't want you to feel left out if that's you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the 5th house, that whole idea, really the 5th house is where we give love, kind of unconditionally. It's not our marriage partner. It's that initial love that,
it's a spicy hookup.
It's a spicy hookup. So yeah. Okay. So we're going to move on now to those of you with Virgo rising. And this puts the spotlight, the attention of Sagittarius season in your 4th house. So the 4th house, really, primarily, it is your family. It is your home. It's your ancestral line. It's the deep hidden parts of you. That's a very, very deep, powerful area. With Sagittarius there, there may be, you probably tend to have a lot of optimism around your home, around your family. Maybe it took you 100 years to notice that there was a problem in your family. Everyone else may have been screaming about the problem, but you may have had your own opinions. So at any rate, I digress. Sagittarius in this house really is, over the course of time, you're really learning here. This is an area of great learning. Wherever Sagittarius is, we're expanding our understanding in order to develop wisdom. Now, at the beginning of this season, with the Saturn squaring these planets, landing in Sagittarius, there's going to be some sort of a restriction that you feel from a relationship or particular relationships in your life that may be causing some stress around how you want to be living your life at home or in your relationships with your family. And, given what we said in the last one, this could be a partner restricting your expansive connection with family members. Or this could be, it could play out in different ways, but some relationship is causing you to feel a restriction around your home or family. So take a look at that, because over the course of the period of time that Saturn's moving through that 7th house, which is a 3-year period of time, you are really learning a lot about who you are in relationship. So it's not really about your partner who may be giving you a hard time or making you feel restrictive around your home. It's about how you navigate relationships. So pay attention. If there's some restriction, some wall that you hit that feels uncomfortable between relationship and home, pause, let it in, take some time to look at the perspective of the other person and what it's teaching you about yourself.
I like that. Yeah, I was just thinking, it's kind of funny, isn't it, having a fire sign at the 4th house? Like, it's just so private. It's such a private place. And you've got this big gregarious sign hanging out there. And I just was thinking, like, how important it is to have a sense of humor about your family. And if you have no matter what your family situation is, if you can laugh with some members of your family, that's great. I just think it's so important. And it'd be easy to kind of go, well, we don't get into the, whatever topics A, B, and C. But if you laugh, if you can crack jokes, I think that is super, super important. So not to be underestimated, like how, especially in that difficult part, because really, not only is the fourth house the house of your family and your home, but it's also your psychologically your own foundation of your personality, where you kind of bring together all your learning years and create this sort of foundation that serves you through adulthood. So having humor there as one of the cornerstones is just going to be super helpful. And yeah, I just think with this, you can easily paint a bunch of scenarios with this one. Like you're going to your home for the holidays and your partner doesn't really get along with the family, or vice versa. There's some kind of judgment or problem. And that it's just an easy scenario to imagine, even if it's not your own. But also to think about, well, what is to be learned here? And I do think some of that is tapping that humor piece. And then as you lean into it and as you accept the challenge that you're given at the beginning of the season, things just get easier. And suddenly you know the way that you speak and your relationships are feeling more stable and supported by the fact that you're willing to learn and grow from whatever the tension is. So there's some interesting little pieces for this one, but it's in angular houses, it's going to have a pretty big impact on just how you feel. I don't know, the angular houses are potent. So that.
Yeah. And it is, I like that you brought up, just having a fire sign, having Sagittarius on that, in that fourth house. I remember early on reading people with Sagittarius in the fourth house always grew up in a huge house with a huge family. It's just kind of funny to think about that, with a lot of laughter and a lot of learning.
You wish, you might have to apply it yourself. I mean, that's part of the point, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So at any rate, let's move on to those who have Libra rising.
Libra. Okay, so with Libra rising, that means that you have Sagittarius in your third house, at least in whole sign houses. So this Sagittarius season is really putting the spotlight on, in a nutshell, your communication. I mean, the third house refers to your voice and how you speak, and then kind of what backs it up, like how did you learn as a kid, and what was your upbringing, and all the stuff that has led you to this point in your life where you speak a certain way. And what that certain way is Sagittarian. So it might be that you are very opinionated with how you speak, or you might be very optimistic, that person who brings humor and light to everybody you talk to, because that's what you bring to it. So, you got to identify yourself on that spectrum. Of course, that's changeable, maybe from day to day or year to year. But that's, in a nutshell, what the Sagittarius season is highlighting for you. Some things to remember is that the third house, I think, Laurie, you said the other day how the third house is that place where you have relationships you don't have a lot of choice in, like your neighbors, who you buy your groceries from, your siblings, like you didn't get a choice in that. So it is about having to use your voice to work with those relationships in your immediate environment. So there's something about all of those themes. And then right at the beginning of the season, Saturn is in your sixth house in Pisces. It issued a challenge to you. It's some kind of challenge around the way you want to speak up. There's maybe some way that you feel restricted or even offended by some way that somebody, it could be at work, is speaking to you, and you're not really happy about it, or they're trying to get you to think a different way and you don't want to. The sixth house could be your workplace where Saturn is, where the challenge is coming from. But it also could be somebody you work out with, or even like a healthcare practitioner, somebody who's trying to help you care for your health. There might be something that they said something you don't want to hear about what you need to do differently in your day-to-day life. And so those are some of the things. As the season wears on, you're more apt to see the gift in whatever that frustration or annoyance or challenge that was put to you at the beginning. So that could be helpful.
Yeah. Just thinking about Saturn moving through that sixth house, you're learning a lot over this couple of year period of time. You're learning an awful lot about, how to work with your own day-to-day routines that take care of your health and all of those kind of things. So right now there's really an attention on that, and something that you've been learning in that area around your health care is what is kind of restricting your voice. I think of sometimes astrology can be so literal, it's ridiculous. Maybe you get laryngitis, and
Yeah.
you have to really think about, what am I doing to support my health? And now all of a sudden I've got this problem and I can't speak up, or, whatever it is, there may be some way in your, I don't know, your gym class that you feel like you can't, your yoga class or whatever, you feel like you can't speak up. There's some frustration in that day-to-day routine or healthcare stuff. There's some frustration that is really challenging your ability to speak your mind about something. And yeah, like you're saying, Jenny, just pay attention to that, because there's a deep learning in that is going to open up a lot more ease through the rest of the season.
Yes, isn't it funny just thinking about being a Libra rising person and then having this Pisces in the 6th house, like just Pisces, that's a hard thing to have to equate with routines. So, I mean, I imagine this area being a challenge because routines by definition have boundaries and Pisces by definition doesn't. So you kind of have this funny thing where you're having to navigate that throughout your life. And then, as you said, with Saturn in the 6th house, I think there's probably some very helpful lessons available of how to stabilize, of how to create structure that you can deal with. Because after all, I mean, Pisces is water. And, if you have water, you need something to pour it into, right? You need to pour it into a cup or, into a riverbank or whatever, it needs some sort of solidity. And so there's a gift in this learning. It might not feel the most comfortable, but I do think it is absolutely the best for your growth, for stability. So
yeah, I think part of what really intrigues me with this combination is how both Sagittarius and Pisces, where Saturn is, are both ruled by Jupiter. So there's such, I don't know, there's something in that makes this more potent to me, because they're both, they both kind of want the same thing. They both want to expand our understanding in different ways. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
Go on and on. But that's an interesting one. So let's move on to Scorpio rising.
That's you.
Oh, here I'm waiting for you to say something. Okay, so thank you, Jenny, for keeping me awake. All right, so if you have Scorpio rising, the Sagittarius season, the focus, the spotlight is on your 2nd house. The 2nd house is, it's where it's really the area of our self-worth, our self-esteem. It's the area that speaks to our money, our resources, how we work with money and resources, thinking about how those things go together, how our self-esteem is tied in with our resources. Do we need a Porsche in the driveway to make ourselves feel good about ourselves? If that's going on, there's a problem. But I digress. At any rate, this is the area of your life that's really being highlighted. So you're really developing or there's a potential to be really developing a new understanding of your self-esteem. And with Sagittarius in there, you tend to be pretty idealistic about your ability to make money, maybe, or, you may just have a pretty solid, obviously depending on your own personal chart, but with Sagittarius in that area, you can have a lot of positive understanding of that area of your life. You might have a lot of humor about your bank account as well. But as we begin this season, there's some challenge coming from the area of your creativity or how you give of yourself. There could be a dynamic here where spending money on a creative project, on a child, on a new love affair. There could be something in there that's challenging your self-worth or challenging your bank account that you might feel a lot of stress around. So if that occurs, if something around that you can identify when that occurs, just pay attention to it, because what you're really learning, the real learning here is around how you give of yourself and how that makes you feel.
Yeah, both of these houses, I think I mentioned this in another one too, but both of these houses are concerned with resources, right? So like the second house is your personal resource, and part of what's in your personal resource toolkit is a sense of humor, hopefully, is a sense of optimism, but also could be the big opinions that Sagittarius lends itself to. So you want to kind of take stock, which of those tools are in your particular toolbox with Scorpio rising, and then the challenge that comes to the resources of really the creative resource, like how you give of yourself, right? Like we talk a lot about that with the fifth house and Saturn kind of posing some kind of challenge, like maybe you really want to do more creative work and you haven't made time for it, or maybe there's a way, or maybe you want to be more involved in some kids' lives, like children of your friends, or it could be any of those things. So think about that, because there's a resource issue here going on between the two, and I just think it's important to think about the learning that's available, as you've already mentioned, like in the house of self-worth, like just what do you need to know, like are you, like something came to mind earlier, it was something like you brought up the Porsche in the driveway, and I think the thing that's really good to question here is, what is your relationship with your possessions? Because you could either be someone who's very flippant about possessions, like, who cares? I don't need that thing, and be sort of on this track of wanting things to have meaning, to be important to you. But you also could be somebody who was like totally bombastic and into the largesse of as much accumulation as you want. So just Scorpio rising, just, track for yourself, like where do you fall in that whole spectrum of things? Like what is your relationship to possessions? Because that exactly might be what Saturn is forcing you to think about, and if you meet that challenge, then there's some more opportunity and gifts ahead for expanding your notion of yourself and who you are. So
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to move on now, and we're going to talk about Sagittarius rising.
Oh, Sagittarius has a special little symbol this time, Laurie.
I know. I couldn't find my normal symbol, so I just mixed it up.
I love it. Okay, so Sagittarius season for you with Sagittarius rising. I mean, this is very much about yourself. So the first house refers to the self. It refers to your overall life direction as a person who values adventure and wisdom and optimism. It also pertains to your self-image. So maybe you have the image of somebody who's optimistic and wise and bringing meaning to things. So all of those things are coming into the spotlight during Sagittarius season. And then right in the beginning of the season, there is this challenge that is being issued to you. And this challenge is coming from somebody in your family, or some issue with your home or the place where you are, or your roots. So there's some kind of challenge being issued that you don't really like. You're just kind of like, can you not right now? I just want to do my Sagittarius thing, and I don't really want any limits put on me. So I'd really rather not. But the bad news is with Saturn, you have to. Saturn's there and it has a lesson for you. So if you can get through that initial begrudging, of the season, then I think that you will find there's a lot of gifts available to you. There's a lot of stability that's available to the way you think about the world. And, you're just going to be able to get through it and find the optimism and the wisdom that truly is what you have as a Sagittarius rising person. So
it's so interesting just to think about how this plays out. Saturn's been moving through your fourth house for a while. It's going to be in there for a chunk of time. So you're really, there's so much learning going on around your home and family. And at this period of time, there's something in that learning that is restricting your expression of how, people with Sagittarius rising, they walk into a room and they're noticed. There's just that larger than life kind of sense of the personality. And yet with Saturn squaring it here at the very beginning of this season, and it could play out like a specific family member is holding you down in some way, or it feels like they're holding you down, or it could be that you really want to have a big party, but you live in a tiny house and you can't invite the friends over. There's so many ways that this can play out, but there's some way in which you are feeling restricted by home or family. And like you've said, Jennie, over and over here, is that moving through that gate, but taking on the learning. You don't want to just say, oh, I'm going to grudgingly push through this. And, I'm never going to forgive my family member. You've got to listen. You've got to really dig into what is that restriction. What is it there to teach you? Because without learning that teaching, you're going to have a hard time accepting the gifts that come through the rest of the season. So, Saturn squares sometimes can just feel like we've hit a wall. But the wall is it's not concrete, especially with Saturn being in Pisces. It's pretty, it's very mutable with both of these planets in mutable signs. It's pretty workable. You just have to pay attention and look at what it's trying to teach you. And go ahead and be that big, expansive personality. All right, nice. Moving on. We're going to go on to those of you with Capricorn rising. So if you've got Capricorn rising, the focus, the spotlight of Sagittarius season is in your 12th house. The 12th house is really, it's a hard one to talk about because it's our unconscious processes of, you can think of the 12th house, I think of it in two kind of different ways. One is on a psychological level. It's your unconscious thought patterns. It's all that stuff that you really, that runs the show from behind the scenes. It's also, you can also think of it as from a more spiritual level of what's going on behind the scenes, in terms of the greater spiritual understanding. The 12th house really allows us to kind of take on a deep understanding of collective awareness. So with Sagittarius in that 12th house, you really have an open understanding of these things. You have the ability to really grow in really profound, deep wisdom within this inner area of who you are. And that's where your attention is this month. At the very beginning of this season, with that square from Saturn, there's a challenge that you have to face. And that challenge could come in the form of having a difficult time finding your voice in talking about it, or it could come through someone, a sibling, a neighbor. It could come in the form of a difficult relationship that's somehow causing you to feel inner restriction, or I'm really grappling with this, but I'm thinking maybe as an example, a sibling restricting your understanding of your own inner process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that those are all absolutely. What I was thinking of, well, because we also have time to think while the other person's talking and be like playing off of what you're thinking. So what I was thinking is that you've got all these big lofty views, you know, this big optimistic or Sagittarian 12th house big picture view. And what Saturn's saying, hey, what about ordinary life? Like,
Yeah.
yo, like I gotta get through my day. I gotta pick up my mail. I've got to go to the grocery store. And you're talking about all these big giant things. What about us ordinary people? You know, and there's a real challenge in the Capricorn rising chart, I think, with Pisces on the third house anyway, about bringing big topics down to common conversations. And I think it's one of their gifts, Capricorn rising, like the ability to fold that in. And so this Sagittarius season, that's what it made me think of, is the ordinary versus the sort of totally ideal collective big picture view.
I like that. I like that because with Saturn having been moving through this house and it'll be there for, you know, a few more years, you're really learning an awful lot about exactly that, that day-to-day environment.
Yeah. It's kind of like understanding this is the building blocks. It's like Legos. You know, the Legos is the like one Legos, the third house. And then this massive sculpture that you built all out of Legos is like the 12th house, this huge thing. And you've got to understand like how those lofty viewpoints work for the common person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that you saw it from that perspective. I was totally losing that. And I think that's really, really important because yeah, that Sagittarius in that 12th house, you've got lofty opinions and big ideas. And yeah, Saturn is grounding you into a more common scenario. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's
Go
all
ahead.
just about your learning. So
yeah. Okay. So let's move on to those folks who have Aquarius rising.
So with Aquarius rising, the Sagittarius season is taking place in your 11th house. I know we like to talk about the 11th house quite a bit. It's the house of community. And so, or in a very simple term, just groups, the groups that you're part of, you know, the classes that you attend, like who are the other people in the class, or, you know, the community you picture like in your town, or, you know, so it isn't necessarily people that you know well, but it's sort of this collective again, group of people. So Sagittarius here suggests a person with a lot of optimism about what the community can offer. Or maybe, I guess it could also be in a more negative way. I guess it could be like the propensity to believe somebody in your community, like to kind of buy into their principles and their religion without questioning it enough. I suppose it could be something like that. But at any rate,
cultiness.
Oh, cultiness. Yeah, cultiness. There's a lot of that in our society. So anyway, something about those things. That's what Sagittarius season is, where it's taking place. There is some kind of challenge that's being issued to you from the second house, and that might be the second house is your values and your money. I was thinking that this could play out as some kind of demand being put on your money, or actually back to the culty example. This is like when you go to the church and they want you to donate like your house to to the cause, you know. So I suppose that would be the more negative or dark side of these things. But in all seriousness, Aquarius rising, some sort of demand is coming to you from, maybe you are trying to do something in your community, but you don't think you have enough money. You know, or maybe you don't feel that you're a worthwhile community member because you haven't participated enough or something. And that's right at the beginning of the season. And whatever the challenge is, work with it, because it might feel pretty uncomfortable and like, ugh, in the beginning. But the more that you kind of accept that there's some wisdom in it, that there's something that you're being asked to learn that's going to dramatically help you in the way you interact with your community. And the rest of Sagittarius season, you're going to see the benefits of whatever you're willing to learn and grow from. So, yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's really great. And I'm so glad you said that. The cultiness and the money. Yeah, there is some way in which there's a challenge between the community and your resources. There's some challenge that you can expect to show up there. And it may not show up as money or possessions. It may show up just, yeah, like you said, in your self-worth. Do you feel worthy of your community? And if not, you want to really think about that. If you bump into some sort of a line there, which you probably will with that square going on at the beginning of the season, really pay attention to it. What you're learning is there's so much over the period of the time that Saturn is going through Pisces, that 3-year period of time. You're really learning about an acceptance of your self-worth, regardless of your money and resources. And whatever this wall is that you bump into here is part of that learning. So, rather than trying to just avoid it and get around it, really looking at it for what the learning is. What is it teaching you about the community that supports you? What is it teaching you about your own worth, regardless of money and resources?
Yeah. I was thinking one other thing, because it gave a couple examples, but another example of this might be something like you are stepping up in front of groups, like the way that you're being witnessed by the group, by the community, and you're having to deal with your feelings of like, oh, I'm not worth it. I'm not worthy enough for this. Like, I'm not that kind of teacher. Like, I can't do that kind of leadership thing. And guess what? Like, yes, you can. Yeah, exactly. And that's part of what this whole Saturn going through that second house for a couple of years, and a total of probably 3 to 4 years, that's what you're learning about, is that you are worthy and you do have what it takes to be the leader in that group, or show up in that group in a certain way that maybe you think you didn't. So that's what I think. And I can think
You've
of
got Sagittarius
yeah.
in that 11th house. Ultimately, everything's on a spectrum here. And I think as time passes and we get older, wherever Sagittarius is, if we're doing our work, that is an area that just becomes so infused with wisdom, ultimately. Yeah. We might be wicked opinionated when we're really young. We might be opinionated and all the, more negative Sagittarius stuff. But if we're doing our work throughout the course of our lives, that is an area that just becomes a place of great wisdom. So,
Nice. Okay.
Moving on, we are now at Pisces rising. And for those of you with Pisces rising, the Sagittarius season, the focus, the spotlight of the season is on your 10th house. So this is very much, bringing in the idea of your career, your vocation, what it is you bring to the outer world, your reputation even. So with Sagittarius in that 10th house, you tend to, you're somebody that brings a lot of levity to the workplace. If you go to a job every day, you probably are you might be the office clown. But regardless, you bring that levity, that positive sense, and you may be quite opinionated as well on a more difficult area. But this is where the focus is. It's your reputation, your career. Now, the challenge early on in this Sagittarius season is coming from yourself. So where is it that you are tripping yourself up and maybe stopping yourself from being that bright, shining light in your career? What is it? Over the course of a couple of years, approximately 3 years, Saturn moving through that first house for you, you're learning an awful lot about yourself. So if you hit a wall of, this is, in some ways, it's similar to what we were saying in the last one with the Aquarius rising. You may be really having a judgment about yourself and how you are in your career. You might feel like you aren't good enough. There may be some of that kind of conversation around your career here as Sagittarius season begins. Pay attention to that, because it's really pointing to some way in which you're learning to accept yourself and become more grounded and serious in who you are. But there's a challenge here that you need to really look at and work with in order to come out the other side and bring in the more positive aspects of this season.
Mhm. Yeah, it is really interesting thinking about the Saturn in the first house, and encourage you to go back and watch that video, because it is your rising sign. But yeah, this is really cool because this is really a way in which people with Pisces rising have a major opportunity to step up into a whole new level of authority, of responsibility, of accountability. This is maybe as a Pisces rising person, I could easily see feeling like you've never really been taken seriously, and with Saturn going through this house, well, now you can be taken seriously. I mean, now is a wonderful opportunity to figure out, what does that mean for you? What does it mean to step up into a whole new role? And I have a really, really good example in my mind of a friend of mine who's running for political office, who has this, and I'm like, yes, it's a perfect time. So I really think that that's interesting. And then during the Sagittarius season, yep, looking up, you are that beacon of light in the profession, as you already said, Laurie. Absolutely. And so there's some really cool connection here about being the authority, yet being the optimist, that shows up in the public eye. And then if you meet that challenge as the season goes on, things are going to flow better for you throughout that season, where it'll start infusing the way that you speak to people, your relationships, and so on. So
that's
cool.
great. Yeah. Sagittarius in the 10th house. It is, you're developing a lot of wisdom over the course of your life in how you show up and what you bring to the rest of the world. That's lovely. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we
Awesome.
are done. There's nobody after Pisces rising. Thank
All
goodness. 12 is plenty to talk about, I think.
Yep.
Okay. So thank
Okay.
you very much, Jenny. And I'm going to stop this.